Rue McClanahan spent years bringing laughter to millions as Blanche Devereaux, but the story she told later, in interviews and in her memoir, about what really happened behind the scenes was far more layered than anything the show itself ever suggested. She witnessed dynamics on that set that rarely made it past the studio doors. Rue never set out to tarnish the legacy of the show. She simply refused to hide the truth. What she shared wasn't scandal for its own sake. It was a quiet, complicated portrait of how four remarkable women managed to work together, and what actually kept them bound when so much else didn't. When the Golden Girls first came together, the cast felt almost too perfectly matched to fail. Rue McClanahan and Betty White had already worked together before, so there was an easy familiarity between them from the earliest rehearsals. But the real magic of the show came from contrast, not just talent. Bea Arthur carried herself with the discipline of someone shaped by years in theater, while Estelle Getty brought an unpredictable comic energy that could turn a scene on a dime. Rue found her place somewhere in between, flexible, perceptive, always reading the room to help a scene land. From the outside, it looked effortless. For women finishing each other's sentences, trading comedic beats like a well-tuned orchestra. The laughter felt genuine, the timing almost instinctive. But Rue later made clear that this chemistry wasn't rooted in personal closeness. It was built on professionalism. That distinction mattered more than most viewers ever realized. Once the cameras rolled, the set ran with near-flawless discipline. No ego, no hesitation, no miscues. Each woman understood exactly how to support the others, and that mutual respect created the illusion of deep personal connection. But the moment filming stopped, that energy shifted. The seamless unity audiences loved didn't necessarily carry into their personal lives. Rue described the experience as impressive, yet slightly surreal. She admired how committed each woman was to the work despite their different backgrounds and personalities, but she couldn't ignore that the bond audiences believed in wasn't entirely real. It lived in the writing, in the performances, in their shared drive to make the show succeed. Not necessarily in their private relationships. What held everything together wasn't friendship in the usual sense. It was something far more deliberate and controlled. As the show's success grew, the differences between the actresses became harder to overlook, and Rue pointed to friction between Bea Arthur and Betty White as the most noticeable. It was never explosive or public. It was quieter and more persistent. Two strong personalities who simply never clicked. Rue never called it dislike, but she never softened it into something gentler than it was either. Their on-camera work was flawless, but offset, a certain distance never fully went away. It wasn't about one incident. It came down to fundamentally different approaches to the work and the environment around it. Bea Arthur's theater background instilled a belief in strict discipline and focus, even between takes. Betty White, shaped by years in television and game shows, thrived on spontaneity, chatting with the studio audience, keeping the mood light during breaks. To Bea, that broke the flow. To Betty, it was part of what made television feel alive. Rue saw both sides clearly, respecting BEA's need for structure while appreciating Betty's gift for connection. That gave her a unique vantage point. Not caught in the middle, but able to understand exactly why the tension existed in the first place. Remarkably, none of this ever touched the quality of their work. If anything, the contrast sharpened it. Each woman stayed fully committed to her performance, and emotional boundaries between them may have helped maintain that focus. Rue noticed small, telling details. Bea, despite her frustrations, would still wait for Betty before heading to lunch. They sat together, shared routines, but it was consistency, not warmth, driving it. Awards added another layer of complexity. Being nominated against her own castmates, year after year, felt inherently awkward to Rue. She never claimed the awards bred resentment, but she acknowledged that certain reactions, particularly from Bea, suggested recognition within the group wasn't always simple to navigate. Still, none of it ever bled into the performances. That was a line they never crossed. The audience never sensed hesitation or doubted the bond between Dorothy and Rose. But behind that illusion, Rue understood something most viewers didn't. The show succeeded not because the women were close, but because they knew exactly how to work together even when they weren't. As the show's acclaim grew, award season introduced a layer of comparison that ran counter to the one big happy family image presented to the public. with each actress frequently nominated in the same category. Success became both a shared achievement and a deeply personal one. Rue admitted that competing directly against the same women she depended on for every scene felt strange. Overnight, collaborators became competitors. The distribution of wins added its own tension. Betty White won early, in the show's first season, setting a tone the others had to absorb. Rue herself won later, as did Bea Arthur. Estelle Getty, despite anchoring much of the show's humor, while playing a character years older than herself, was nominated repeatedly before finally winning. None of this triggered open conflict, but it created an undercurrent that lingered. Congratulations, especially in the early years, were sometimes noticeably restrained. The warmth of an awards show didn't always follow the cast back to set the next morning. Rue acknowledged the shift without dramatizing it, and without denying it either. Over time, that early discomfort faded into a more collective sense of pride as the series cemented its place in television history. Rue's take on this evolution was grounded, not a fairy tale transformation into total harmony, but a gradual adjustment. The cast learned to live within the structure they were in, understanding that while the industry might separate them on paper, the work required them to stay connected on screen. She viewed that period not as a rupture, but as a test, one that revealed the limits of their personal bond, while proving the strength of their professional one. In the show's later seasons, a single decision, not a personality clash, not a fight over awards, brought everything to a close. According to Rue, Bea Arthur reached a point where she felt the show had already accomplished what it set out to do. The writing, though still solid, no longer offered the creative challenge it once had, and she grew wary of repeating the same emotional and comedic patterns. For her, staying meant remaining somewhere that no longer felt rewarding. Rue understood that reasoning, even if she didn't share it. From where she stood, the show was still thriving, audiences were still responding, and the on-screen chemistry, however complicated behind the scenes, kept translating perfectly. She, Betty White, and Estelle Getty were ready to continue, and there was a real path toward extending the series. But Bea Arthur's decision was firm and final. She would not go on. That left the production with a choice: end at its peak or move forward without one of its central figures. Since removing Dorothy would have fundamentally changed the show's dynamic, the compromise was to end the original series while its identity was still intact, and launch a spin-off carrying the remaining 3 actresses into a new setting, a hotel. Rue stepped into that next chapter without hesitation, but Bea Arthur's absence was immediately felt, not as a dramatic loss, but as a structural gap nothing could fully fill. Rue never viewed the ending as a failure. She saw it as a natural conclusion, one shaped by each woman's individual priorities, which eventually stopped aligning. What mattered to her was that the work they'd built together stayed intact, untouched by forced continuation. The show, in her view, didn't fall apart. It simply stopped the moment one of its essential pieces chose to step away, an ending that closed one chapter, while preserving the legacy of everything they created. In her later years, and especially in reflections shared before her passing, Rue became more candid about a belief audiences had always taken for granted, that the 4 women were as close off screen as they appear to be on it. She never dismissed that belief outright, but she made clear it wasn't the whole truth. What audiences saw was genuine in performance, but it didn't fully capture their real relationships. What they shared, she explained, was something more specific and more disciplined than ordinary friendship, a working bond rooted in trust in one another's craft. They didn't need constant socializing or shared confidences to function as a unit. Instead, they relied on a mutual understanding of timing, tone, and responsibility. Each woman knew exactly what the others would bring to a scene, and that predictability gave their performances a quiet sense of security. That said, Rue didn't deny real moments of connection existed. Years spent together in a demanding environment naturally produced certain routines. Shared meals, side-by-side seats during long shooting days, small habits that looked like closeness from the outside. But she was careful to frame these as part of the rhythm of the job, as much as personal choice. Beyond work, their lives were largely separate, shaped by different social circles and different priorities. What stood out most in Rue's reflections was her refusal to romanticize the experience. She didn't paint the set as a place of constant warmth, nor as one riddled with conflict. Instead, She described something more realistic. For accomplished, strong-willed women who found a way to work together without needing to change who they were. And that balance, she believed, was the real key to the show's success. She also recognized that this kind of dynamic might not have worked under different circumstances. The comedy they were creating demanded precision, listening, reacting, and trusting that your scene partner would deliver exactly what was needed. In that environment, professional reliability mattered more than personal closeness. Audiences read that reliability as friendship, but in truth, it was something carefully built and maintained rather than something that simply happened.